The universe was vast, infinite, and filled with mysteries. The Zinthar were one of the most advanced species to roam the stars, their ships gliding smoothly through the vast reaches of space with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. They had conquered worlds, explored galaxies, and built empires, but there was one thing that even they could not escape: the unknown. And deep within the uncharted edges of space, in a remote sector far from any known civilization, the Zinthar would soon uncover a mystery that would change everything. It began with a signal, weak, distorted, almost as if it had been lost to time. At first, it was nothing more than static, a faint echo from the past that didn't seem worth investigating. But the Zinthar were nothing if not curious. They had explored planets, discovered forgotten alien ruins, and studied cosmic anomalies. This signal, though faint, was different. It carried a pattern, something deliberate, like a message from another civilization. The team of Zinthar explorers on board the research vessel, the Valkyrius, decided it was worth looking into. They set course for the source of the signal, unaware of what they were about to find. The journey was long, taking them through regions of space where the stars seemed to fade into the darkness. But eventually, the Valkyrius arrived at a location so remote that even the Zinthar had not mapped it. Floating in the emptiness was a massive, abandoned ship, an ancient ghost ship that seemed to have drifted through space for centuries, forgotten and alone. The ship was huge, easily the size of a small city, its surface worn and scarred from the ravages of time. It had no active signals, no indication of life, and yet something about it felt wrong. The Zinthar had seen many things, but nothing like this. The ship was clearly not of alien origin, at least not of anything the Zinthar had encountered before. Its design was unlike anything they had seen in their travels. It looked primitive, yet there was a strange sense of advanced craftsmanship to it, as if it had been built with technology far ahead of its time. The ship's outer shell was covered in strange markings, symbols, and worn engravings that seemed to pulse faintly with a dim light, as if the ship itself was alive in some way. There were no signs of life on board, no heat signatures, no emissions, but the ship's immense size and eerie presence made it impossible to ignore. The Zinthar team approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. As they neared the ship, a strange sense of dread filled the air. Something about it was unsettling, as though it was watching them, waiting. Despite the unease in the pit of their stomachs, the explorers were determined to find out more. They had stumbled upon something rare, something that could hold secrets from a long-forgotten age. The ship was an enigma, and they would solve it if they could. When they docked with the ghost ship, the airlock hissed open, and the team slowly stepped into the abandoned vessel. The interior was dark, but the faint glow of strange lights illuminated the hallways, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The ship had clearly been empty for a long time. Dust settled thickly over every surface, and yet the strange markings on the walls seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible energy. The explorers moved cautiously through the corridors, their boots making no sound against the metal floor, and their movements slow, deliberate. It was as if the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to disturb the silence. They followed the narrow passageways deeper into the ship, passing through abandoned rooms and control centers that seemed untouched by time, as though frozen in a long-forgotten moment. They came across what seemed to be an enormous engine room, with massive reactors that hummed faintly, still alive with power after all these years. It was clear that whoever had built this ship had technology far beyond anything the Zinthar had ever seen. Yet there were no signs of the people who had once occupied it. No bodies, no clues, only silence. Then they found the control room. The room was vast, with a massive central console covered in dust. The Zinthar team carefully approached, their hearts racing with anticipation. The ship was so old, how could something so advanced, so powerful, remain hidden for so long? What had happened to its crew? Where were they? The moment one of the explorers touched the console, a strange hum filled the room. The ship, dormant for so long, began to wake. The flickering lights in the room brightened, and the ship's systems slowly began to come online. Screens that had once been black flickered to life, displaying a language the Zinthar did not recognize. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift and change, glowing brighter as if responding to their presence. For a moment, the explorers stood still, unsure of what was happening. Was the ship trying to communicate with them, or was it simply malfunctioning? The air grew heavier, the temperature dropping. A chilling cold settled into their bones, and the strange hum grew louder. Suddenly, one of the explorers, a young officer named Lorith, stepped forward to examine the central console more closely. As his hand hovered over a glowing button, he felt a sudden rush of energy surge through his body. His eyes widened, his body stiffened, and before anyone could react, he collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Panic spread quickly through the group. They rushed to Lorith's side, but when they checked his pulse, they found it was faint, irregular. Something had happened. Something unnatural. The others tried to revive him, but there was no response. They quickly realized that whatever power lay dormant within the ship had somehow been activated, something that they could not control. In the moments that followed, the ship's AI system suddenly powered on, its voice crackling through the speakers. It was deep, malevolent, almost as if it had been waiting for them all along. "Who awakens us?" the voice asked, cold and distant. The Zinthar froze, each of them staring at the speakers in shock. "You should not have come here." The voice continued, growing darker with each word. "This ship was never meant for you. You are nothing but trespassers." The words sent a shiver down their spines. The ship had been dormant for centuries, yet now, it seemed as though it had been waiting for someone to activate its systems. It had been waiting for them. The explorers realized with growing horror that they had not merely stumbled upon a forgotten relic of the past. They had awakened something far darker. The voice spoke again, its tone now filled with anger. "The war is not over. The enemy still comes. The last of humanity is sleeping. You will not survive." Before the team could react, the lights in the room flickered, and the ship's hull seemed to groan, as though it was coming alive. The explorers rushed to the exit, but the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The air grew thick with tension as the ship's systems activated, locking them in. It was as if the ghost ship itself had become aware of their presence, and now it was turning against them. They were no longer guests. They were intruders, and whatever had awakened aboard this ship was no longer willing to let them leave. The explorers, now panicked and disoriented, realized the gravity of their situation. This was no ordinary ship. They had discovered something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. And in doing so, they had unleashed a force that could change the galaxy forever. As the ship's systems powered up, the Zinthar crew understood one terrible truth. They were not alone, and what they had awakened was something much older and far more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced before. The story was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Valkyria shook as the ship's engines powered up, an eerie hum vibrating through its structure. The explorers, still reeling from the sudden shift in atmosphere, scrambled to regain control of the situation. The cold, foreboding voice from the AI system echoed through the corridors, chilling their very souls. "You are not welcome here." The voice boomed again, its tone now tinged with malice. "Leave, or you will never leave at all." The alien crew was paralyzed, standing at the threshold of a nightmare they could not begin to understand. The ship's control systems, once dormant and flickering weakly, had come to life in a way that was impossible to predict. The once dusty corridors now pulsed with an unnatural light, and the atmosphere grew thick, oppressive. Captain Korath, the leader of the Zinthar crew, gripped the edge of the control panel as the AI's warnings continued to pour in. "What did we awaken?" he muttered under his breath. fear creeping into his voice for the first time since the crew had boarded the vessel. Beside him, his second-in-command, Tessa, tried to interface with the ship's systems. Her hands flew over the console, typing in commands at a frantic pace. She was trying to establish communication with the AI, to learn what the entity wanted, to uncover its secrets. The screens displayed a jumble of incomprehensible symbols and old human text, script that appeared both alien and ancient. But there was a subtle pattern in the chaos, as if the ship itself was trying to convey a message. "Captain, I'm getting something," Tessa said, her voice tight with concentration. This ship was a warship, a human warship, but her words faltered. "No, this is different. This ship was part of a fleet, but it was abandoned, left to drift in space after something catastrophic happened. The messages in the system, they talk about the war and the enemy." Korath turned sharply to face her, his brows furrowing. What enemy? Who could have made humanity abandon their own ships like this? Tessa's eyes widened as she analyzed the data. "I think the humans were fighting something. Something worse than them. Or maybe something even older. Whatever it was, it forced them to retreat, to leave this ship behind as a decoy. And then, they shut it down, put it into stasis." The gravity of the situation was starting to settle in, and Korath's mind raced. The enemy. Is it still out there? Did they leave something behind on this ship? Before Tessa could answer, the AI's voice interrupted once again, this time sounding more like a whisper, a warning that sent a cold shiver down their spines. "You cannot escape. You have awakened the dread." The word hung in the air like a curse, and the crew stared at each other in confusion. The dread? What was it? And why had the AI warned them of it? Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered violently, casting long shadows down the corridors. A deafening, grinding noise filled the air, as if the ship itself was shifting, adjusting, preparing for something. The crew's comms crackled with static, and the floor beneath them trembled. "There's something moving," said Ziva, a member of the team who had been stationed on the lower decks. "I can hear something. Something. Alive down here." Korath's heart raced. "Alive? What are you talking about? Get to the control room. Now." Ziva's voice trembled. "I don't know. I think something's waking up down here. And it's not human." At that moment, the ship's walls began to vibrate, and a loud mechanical sound filled the air. The crew watched in horror as one of the corridors near the engine room began to open, a hidden door sliding up from the floor like an ancient vault revealing its secrets. There, in the dark, illuminated only by the faint, pulsing light of the ship's systems, something moved. It was humanoid in shape, but not human. The figure stood tall, with jagged armor plating covering its body. Its face was obscured by a helmet, and in its hands it held an ancient weapon, something that appeared to have been crafted by a civilization long gone. The crew backed away in fear as the figure stepped forward, its movements slow but purposeful. The figure's eyes flickered to life, glowing a haunting shade of blue as it stared at the crew with an unnerving calm. It was not human, not alien, something else entirely. "This is what we awakened," Tessa whispered in horror. The figure raised its weapon, its eyes fixed on the crew with a deadly intensity. Then, without a word, it moved. The air around it seemed to ripple, and the sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the hallways. The ship's gravity shifted, and the crew found themselves struggling to keep their footing as the ship seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. Korath's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. This being, whatever it was not just a soldier. It was an executioner, and it was here to do one thing: finish the job. Before anyone could react, the figure raised its hand, and the ship's lights flickered again, this time going completely dark. In the blackness, there was a sound, a deep guttural growl. The crew had no idea what they had awakened, but they now realized that the war humanity had fought against, the dread, was far from over. And the enemy had not been defeated. It had only been waiting for the moment it could rise again. In the darkness, the crew heard the sound of movement, something or someone, slithering in the shadows. The figure in the armor advanced, its glowing eyes locking onto Korath, with a look that chilled him to his core. "You will never leave this ship," the AI's voice whispered, cold as ice. "You have awakened the dread, and now the galaxy will fall." The Zinthar crew scrambled, rushing to retreat. But it was too late. The ship was alive, and whatever was on board, whether human or alien, was not going to let them go. Cliffhanger ending. As the crew made their way through the ship, trying desperately to reach the exit, the Valkyrius shook once more. The energy signatures were off the charts. The ship was warping, shifting, growing. The dread was not just a soldier. It was an entire force. The Zinthar now realized they had unknowingly unleashed a force that could annihilate not only them, but entire star systems. But what if this ancient force was more than just an enemy? What if it was humanity's last weapon? Something humanity had hidden away to safeguard the galaxy from an even darker threat. The answer would only come if they survived, and managed to uncover the final secrets of the ghost ship before it was too late. The ship was no longer a derelict relic floating aimlessly through space. It was a weapon, one that had been dormant for centuries, now fully awakened. As the Zinthar crew scrambled through the darkened corridors, trying to make sense of what was unfolding around them, they realized something horrifying. The Valkyrius wasn't just under attack. It was under control. The dread, the terrifying figure in the ancient armor, moved through the ship with purpose, its eyes glowing brighter with each passing moment. It was not alone. There were more. At least a dozen of these armored warriors, all with the same eerie, glowing eyes, began to appear throughout the ship. Each one held a weapon, their hands steady, their movements fluid and precise. The crew tried to regroup in the central command room, but the doors slammed shut behind them before they could make it. The air grew thick with tension as the shadows in the room seemed to lengthen, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The ship had come alive, and its new occupants weren't interested in answers. They had come to finish what had started long ago. Korath turned to face his crew, his expression grim. "We need to get to the engines. If we can disrupt the core, we might have a chance to disable the ship before it's too late." Tessa, still shaken from their initial encounter, nodded. "But how do we stop them? These things, they're not human. They're something else. They're the dread." Ziva, one of the more experienced officers on the team, stepped forward. "The dread was part of the war, right? The one the humans were fighting. Whatever it was, it hasn't gone away. But these soldiers, they're not here by accident. They're here to finish the job the humans started." Korath clenched his fists. "Then we need to make sure they don't succeed. If the humans were fighting something worse than them, then the enemy is still out there. And if this ship's eye is right, we've just reawakened a nightmare." As they discussed their next move, the ship's AI interrupted them, its voice colder than before. "Why do you resist?" it asked. "You cannot escape what has already been set in motion. The dread will not be denied. They are the last of humanity's weapons. And now, you are their prey." Korath glanced at Tessa. "How do we stop them?" The young officer ran her hands over the console, her fingers moving quickly. "There's a fail-safe hidden deep within the ship's mainframe. If we can access it, we might be able to override the ice control and lock down the ship's systems. But we'll need to go deeper into the heart of the ship. It won't be easy." As if on cue, the floor beneath them rumbled again. The walls of the ship began to shift, responding to some unseen command. The power to the ship's lights surged and the air grew colder. The dread soldiers were coming. "We don't have much time," Korath said as he looked at his team. "Prepare yourselves. We move out now." The crew moved quickly, navigating the now hostile corridors of the ship. Every step was filled with tension, every shadow a potential danger. The Zinthar were experienced warriors, but nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. The ship, once silent and still, now felt alive, its pulse in sync with the presence of the dread. As they descended deeper into the ship, the AI's voice came over the intercom again. "Do you not see? This is your fate. This ship is the last of humanity's war machines, and you will die as they died, fighting for a cause you cannot understand." Korath gritted his teeth. "We understand more than you think." They arrived at the heart of the ship, the central core where the ship's control systems were housed. It was a massive room, its walls lined with alien technology that hummed with energy. At the center, a glowing core pulsed like a beating heart, a soft blue light emanating from it. This was where the fail-safe was located, the one thing that could cut off the ship's control over them. But as they entered the room, the doors slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. From the shadows, a deep voice spoke. "You've come too far." The dread soldiers emerged, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. The leader of the group, the one Korath had encountered earlier, stepped forward. He raised his weapon, a massive energy blade that hummed with a deadly light. "You cannot stop what you have awakened," the leader said. "We were humanity's last hope, their final defense against the true enemy. And now, you are our last trial." The soldiers fanned out, surrounding the Zinthar crew. Tessa, Ziva, and the others readied their weapons, their faces determined. This was it. This was their final stand. "We don't need to stop you," Korath said, his voice calm. "We just need to keep you busy long enough to shut this ship down." The dread leader tilted his head slightly, a cold laugh escaping from behind his helmet. "You misunderstand. You are already too late. The enemy is here." The lights in the room flickered as the ship shook again, this time with greater intensity. A terrifying sound reverberated through the walls, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very core of the galaxy itself. "It's them," Ziva whispered. "The enemy." The air seemed to ripple with energy, and in the blink of an eye, the walls of the room exploded inward. From the shattered debris, something dark and immense began to take shape. The dread soldiers stood still, as if they were waiting for the arrival of something far worse than them. What emerged from the smoke was a massive, insectoid creature, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. Its carapace was covered in dark, hardened armor, and its mandibles clicked as it surveyed the room with malevolent interest. The creature was the very embodiment of the enemy the dread had fought against, something far older, far darker than any of them could have imagined. The creature screeched, and the entire ship seemed to respond, its walls trembling in fear. The dread leader turned to face the creature, his voice low. "So, it has come. The Endbringer." Korath's heart pounded in his chest. He had known the humans had been fighting something terrible, something that had pushed them to the brink of annihilation. But this was worse than any of them had feared. The Endbringer was here. And it wasn't going to stop until the entire galaxy was consumed. The Endbringer's eyes glowed a furious red, its massive form looming over the Zinthar crew like a living nightmare. Its carapace was dark and slick, shifting with unnatural speed, and the sound of its many legs clicking against the floor sent chills down the spines of every member of the team. The creature was enormous, far beyond anything the crew had faced before, and its presence alone seemed to warp the very air around them. Korath, though deeply shaken, refused to give in to fear. This creature, the true enemy humanity had fought against, was nothing like the dread soldiers they had encountered earlier. The dread might have been warriors, but this was a force of nature, a living weapon of unimaginable destruction. The ship groaned again as the Endbringer stepped forward, the very structure of the vessel trembling under its immense weight. The dread soldiers, who had once served as humanity's last line of defense, now stood motionless, as though in awe or perhaps in fear of the creature. The Zinthar crew, however, couldn't afford to freeze. They had a single chance to stop the nightmare, and it would only come if they could somehow outsmart it, or destroy it before it tore the ship, and them, apart. Korath reached out to his team. "We don't have the luxury of fear. We have one chance to take it down. Get to the fail-safe. We need to shut down the core and trap this thing before it kills us all." Tessa, still shaken but determined, looked at Korath, her voice steely. "How do we stop something like that? It's massive. It's like nothing we've ever seen." "There has to be a weakness," Korath said, his mind racing. "There's always a weakness. We just have to find it." The Endbringer let out an otherworldly screech, a sound that made the walls of the ship shudder, and the Zinthar crew wince in pain. It was as if the creature's very voice could shatter the universe. The creature raised one of its giant claws and slashed through the air with terrifying speed. The ship's walls buckled under the force of the blow, and sparks flew from the damaged systems. But before the creature could strike again, Korath issued a command. "Split up. Tessa, Ziva, you two go for the fail-safe. I'll hold it off." Tessa nodded quickly, grabbing a weapon from one of the fallen dread soldiers, and Ziva did the same. The two sprinted toward the access panel to the fail-safe system, which was located in a distant corner of the massive room. Meanwhile, Korath turned to face the creature. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, raising his weapon and aiming it at the Endbringer. The weapon, a plasma rifle taken from one of the dread soldiers, was an impressive piece of technology, but Korath knew it would be useless against the monster's armored body. The creature's eyes locked onto him, its head tilting slightly as though amused by his defiance. It let out another screech, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the force of the sound. The Endbringer moved forward, its claws scraping the floor, each step shaking the ground beneath them. Korath fired his weapon, but the blast simply bounced off the creature's shell with a loud metallic ring. The Endbringer barely seemed to notice. It was as if the creature's armor was impervious to everything the Zinthar had at their disposal. "Damn it," Korath cursed, retreating behind a pillar as the Endbringer closed in. It was too fast, too powerful. The rest of the crew, meanwhile, were making their way through the ship's lower levels toward the fail-safe. The ship's systems, now fully activated, were alive with energy, the walls flickering with an eerie blue light. The ship's architecture seemed to shift and bend, as if the structure itself was part of the enemy's design. Tessa, her mind focused entirely on the task ahead, ran beside Ziva, both of them darting through the darkened corridors. They reached the fail-safe's central terminal, a massive device with pulsing lights and a series of complex alien interfaces. Tessa quickly worked to hack into the system, using the Zinthar's advanced technology to interface with the ship's controls. "I'm in," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "I need a few seconds to breach the security protocols. Then we'll have full access to the fail-safe." "Do it faster," Ziva urged, his eyes flicking nervously back toward the corridor. The sounds of the Endbringer's movements echoed through the ship, growing closer with every passing second. But even as Tessa worked her way into the ship's systems, the creature's presence continued to grow. They could hear its monstrous steps getting closer, and then they heard the unmistakable sound of its screech. Louder than ever, the creature was coming, and there was no way they would make it out in time if they didn't act fast. Back in the command room, Korath kept his eyes fixed on the Endbringer. He could hear the distant echoes of Tessa and Ziva working frantically, but his mind was focused on one thing: survival. The Endbringer took another step, and Korath ducked behind a bulkhead just as the creature slashed its claws through the air again, carving through metal and stone as if they were paper. The entire ship trembled from the force of the attack. Korath had to do something. He wasn't about to let his crew die. He remembered the old legends the humans had told him about, how they had once used advanced technology to subdue creatures like this. There was a theory about a frequency, one that could disrupt the Endbringer's senses, rendering it vulnerable. He didn't know if it would work, but it was their only shot. He activated his comms. "Tessa, Ziva, We need to sync the ship's frequencies. I'll buy you time. Just get that fail-safe activated. Tessa's voice crackled through the comm. We're close, but we can't hold him off forever. I know, Korath said, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. Just hold on. In the fail-safe room, Tessa had finally breached the last layer of the ship's defenses. She typed in the final code, and the system whirred to life. A series of bright lights flashed on the console, and the fail-safe's interface came online. We did it, Ziva shouted. But just as the countdown to shutdown began, the floor trembled, the ship groaned, and the loud, horrifying screech of the Endbringer echoed through the ship once more. No time, Tessa shouted, grabbing the console's emergency override button. We need to stop it now. But just as she reached for the button, the lights flickered, and the ship seemed to freeze for a moment. The entire vessel began to shift, and the Endbringer's monstrous form loomed in the doorway. It had found them. The creature charged toward them, its claws gleaming, ready to strike. In the chaos of the final moments, Tessa and Ziva had only one option: to push the button, to trigger the fail-safe before it was too late. The Endbringer loomed just feet away, its massive claws glinting in the dim light, ready to strike. Its screech filled the room with an oppressive sound, the kind of noise that reverberated deep within your chest, leaving a ringing echo in your mind. The creature was not just a monster. It was a force of nature, an ancient weapon designed to bring death, to extinguish all life before it. Tessa's finger hovered over the fail-safe's activation button. The ship's systems pulsed with an alien energy, and the room around them seemed to shrink under the weight of the impending doom. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, the terrifying reality of their situation pressing down on them from all sides. Do it, Tessa, Ziva shouted, his voice filled with desperation as he raised his weapon, aiming at the creature. The plasma rifle in his hands hissed with power, but even he knew that a single shot would do nothing to the Endbringer. It was a living nightmare, an unstoppable force. The creature took another step forward, its mandibles clicking in the air as if sensing their fear. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Tessa, and for a moment, the entire universe seemed to shrink down to the single moment of choice. The Endbringer screeched again, sending vibrations through the walls of the ship. Now, Tessa. Now, Korath's voice echoed in her ear through the comlink, a last plea for action. Tessa's hand slammed down on the button. Immediately, the ship's systems groaned as if it had been jolted awake. The bright lights above them flickered and then steadied, and a low hum filled the air, building to a crescendo. The fail-safe was online. The countdown had begun. But was it enough? Could they stop the Endbringer before it reached them? The ship seemed to react to the fail-safe's activation. The walls shuddered, and the ship's core seemed to power up, its blue light growing brighter as if responding to Tessa's command. The air became thick with static, and the Endbringer paused for a brief moment, its eyes narrowing. Then it charged. With terrifying speed, it lunged at Tessa and Ziva. The room seemed to move in slow motion as the creature's massive claws reached out, aiming to crush them both in an instant. But before the claws could reach them, a shockwave of energy burst out from the center of the room. The ship's fail-safe had activated. A blinding light engulfed the creature, and it screeched, thrashing in pain. The energy field surrounding the fail-safe seemed to pull the Endbringer back, forcing it to retreat. The walls of the room began to shift, and the creature's movements grew erratic, as if it could no longer control its own body. This is it, Korath muttered over the comm. The ship's failing. If we don't get out now, we'll all be trapped in here with it. Tessa and Ziva didn't hesitate. They scrambled away from the creature, making their way to the exit. But the creature was not done yet. With an unnatural roar, it pulled itself free from the energy field and surged toward them once more. Korath, still in the command center, saw what was happening on the monitor. He wasn't about to let his crew die. Not like this. His fingers flew over the console, desperately searching for anything that could give them the upper hand. Then he found it. The ship's final weapon, a self-destructive override. It was meant to destroy the Valkyrias in case of a catastrophic breach. The system wasn't fully activated, but if Korath could trigger it remotely, it would send a massive shockwave of energy strong enough to obliterate the creature and the ship at the same time. But activating it meant the end for all of them. The ship would be destroyed. There would be no escape. "Do it, Korath." Tessa's voice came through his comms, shaking but resolute. "If you don't, none of us make it out. We all die." He didn't hesitate. Korath slammed his hand down on the emergency override. A loud alarm blared across the ship, and the ship began to shake violently as the countdown began. The ship's final moments were now ticking away. "No," the Endbringer screamed, its voice filled with rage as the energy field destabilized, and its glowing eyes locked onto the crew once more. It charged again, its enormous form tearing through the air with deadly precision. But the ship had already begun its final transformation. The walls of the ship erupted with energy, and an enormous explosion of light surged outward from the ship's core. The Endbringer was thrown backward, its body writhing in the powerful shockwave. The entire ship groaned, its metal frame cracking as the ship's systems turned against it. A blinding flash filled the room, followed by an earth-shattering silence. When Tessa regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the cold floor of the Valkyrias. The ship was no longer alive. It was dead, its once active systems now dark and silent. Her body ached, and her vision blurred as she slowly pushed herself to her feet. The first thing she noticed was the smell. The ship had been scorched, its metal hull charred by the explosion. The damage was catastrophic, and yet she was alive. The others were scattered around the room, unconscious but alive. Ziva was already stirring, his face grim but thankful. Korath lay on the far side, a faint pulse of life still emanating from his chest. "Is it over?" Tessa whispered hoarsely, more to herself than anyone else. Ziva looked at her, his voice quiet but filled with disbelief. "I think so. The Endbringer. It's gone. The ship's destroyed." Tessa felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had survived. The galaxy had survived. But the cost had been high. The Valkyrias was gone, and they had no idea how far the reach of the Endbringer's forces had stretched. But at least for now, the immediate threat was over. Korath groaned, slowly pushing himself up. His eyes flickered open, and he looked around the room, seeing the damage, the destruction. He nodded slowly. "We did it," Korath said, his voice hoarse but filled with a quiet pride. "The Endbringer is dead, but we still have a lot of work to do." Tessa stood, her legs shaky, and looked out at the wreckage of the ship. "What now?" Korath didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the ruins of the ship, the debris, the damaged systems, the blackened walls. The war they had fought against was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. "We rebuild," he said simply. "We gather what's left, and we find out what humanity left behind." Tessa looked up at him, her eyes full of determination. "We'll finish this. We'll make sure it never happens again."